Rumors were swirling last month. 14 cities in the United States are planning to ban meat. The news made its rounds mostly on conservative news websites. The Federalist reported that the plan for 2030 outlines some very ambitious goals. These include zero consumption of meat, zero consumption of dairy, 3 new clothes items per year per person, 0 private vehicle ownership, and 1 short return airline flight per person once every 3 years. Close to 100 cities have signed on to the deal. In the United States, this includes Austin, Boston, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New Orleans, New York City, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Portland, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and Seattle. The Federalist also noted that the program is largely funded by Democrat billionaire Michael Bloomberg. And as expected, well, establishment news outlets were quick to label the whole thing as fake, just a big conspiracy theory, just another example of why disinformation is a threat to humanity. PolitiFact declared social media post distorts climate report. No U.S. city is banning meat, dairy, new clothes, or cars. And it adds, we could find no evidence that any U.S. cities have agreed to ban dairy, new clothes, meat, or private cars. Snopes labeled it all as false, and it says there's no plan for 14 U.S. cities to ban meat, dairy, and private cars by 2030. And it adds as well, we also found no evidence that a group of U.S. cities had signed on to plans to ban such products for consumption. But dig into these a bit more and you'll find something a bit odd. There's a play on words. The articles are deceptively written. In their defense, they're latching on to the technical errors made by some of the program's critics, but in essence, the agenda is real. It's very much real. And of course, they note this to an extent. If you read the so-called, fact checks, the technicalities of this. The cities are not planning to ban meat outright. They're pushing to reduce consumption of meat, with zero consumption being the target. You get that? They're not banning meat. They're merely trying to make us have zero consumption of meat. And the same goes for the other goals. They're very much real, but they're not bans, technically. And the other technicalities that the program behind this is not binding. The cities in this are doing it voluntarily. And it's through a global coalition of mayors. It's all part of the C40 Cities program. In October 2019, it declared on its website, 14 cities commit to sustainable food policies that will address the global climate emergency. And it alleges that eating a sustainable diet and avoiding food waste could cut greenhouse gas emissions from the food we eat by more than 60%. This was all part of what it called the Planetary Health Diet, which it claimed could save 11 million lives each year if adopted universally. And it says as well that mayors will work with their citizens to achieve a planetary health diet for all by 2030. So is this meat ban real? Well, according to the C40 Cities website, it's not quite the case. It says that mayors will use their procurement powers to change what kind of food cities buy and introduce policies that make healthy, delicious, and low-carbon food affordable and accessible for all. They'll also reduce food loss and wasted food. In other words, it's not technically a ban. Again, it's an agenda that mayors across the United States and around the world have signed on to. And they're going to be using the powers in office to change the kinds of foods that cities buy and to enact policies to try to bring about this agenda. Now, we can already see this happening as well, globally in fact. We can take New York City as an example. The same year the C40 Cities announcement was made, then New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced New York City's Green New Deal, a $14 billion initiative to fight climate change.
Let's be clear, we have until 2030 to start changing things fundamentally, or our lives just won't be the same. So we are not just passing laws and rules and telling people they have to do things differently. This is a massive undertaking. The New York City Green New Deal is a $14 billion effort to change things while we still can, to make a difference while we still can.
So what does that $14 billion Green New Deal mean in practice? Well, New York City's chief climate policy advisor, Danielle Zarrilli, laid it out.
It also means converting every single vehicle in our city fleet to electric and renewable fuels, going carbon neutral for our entire fleet. It means expanding our solar, which we've already increased 7-fold since 2013. It means cutting our beef purchases 50%. Phasing out processed meat, a major source of our emissions, implementing congestion pricing, speeding up buses, prioritizing streets for pedestrians, the list goes on, and moving to a mandatory citywide organics program across the entire city.
Now, Eric Adams, the current New York City mayor, was actually involved as well at the time. In 2017, as Brooklyn Borough President, Adams worked with Bill de Blasio to implement Meatless Monday at 15 schools in Brooklyn. This Meatless Monday program was expanded by then Mayor Bill de Blasio in 2019 to all of New York's public schools. That's 1,700 schools. Here's Eric Adams championing the move back in 2019.
We're going to the heart of the matter. The number one destruction of our ozone layer is the overconsumption of meat in this country. And so we're starting here with Meatless Mondays.
Then in 2022, last year, that was after Mayor Adams took office, then New York City, under the New York City, he declared that its public school system would go meat-free every Friday. That means there's no meat now for school kids in New York on Mondays or Fridays, for those keeping track. And it's not ending there. In April this year, Mayor Adams vowed to reduce New York City's food-based emissions at agencies by 33% over the next 7 years. In other words, by 2030. Perfectly in line with that 2030 initiative we're told isn't really a thing.
That's why today we're committed to reducing the city food emission by 33% by 2030 and challenging our private sector partners to reduce by 25% by 2030. What this means is shifting the kinds of food we buy and serve. We've already started this work in our hospitals and our schools.
And yes, this is part of an agenda against meat. New York Times reported that same month, they said this: why New York's mostly vegan mayor is cutting the city's meat budget. It notes that Adams is using the city's roughly $300 million food budget as a tool to cut meat consumption. In fact, it quotes him saying this: "It is easy to talk about emissions that are coming from vehicles and how it impacts our carbon footprint. It is easy to talk about the emissions that's coming from buildings and how it impacts our environment. But we now have to talk about beef." And I don't know if people are really ready for this conversation. Now, remember, this is all conspiracy, of course. That is, well, if we listen to the so-called fact checkers. Remember, as PolitiFact stated, quote, "No U.S. city is banning meat, dairy, new clothes, or cars." Now, obviously, U.S. cities are just restricting these things and enacting policies to phase them out, notably by 2030. So what about that C40 cities agenda? Well, look, funny enough, Mayor Eric Adams has been a member on that program since 2005. The program has a whole page for him and New York City on its website. And of course, New York City is just one of the 14 cities directly on board with this program. And it's not some big secret either. The C40 Cities program has all the cities involved globally listed publicly on its website. And many of these cities have actively been involved in passing legislation in line with this agenda.